It's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
Telling you guys to laugh, love, live, and stay strong.
I miss y'all so much. I'm bored out of my mind.
You'll grow. Through the hard times, we keep it smart, never gamble. Hop on the stage and spread your light like a candle.
How do I breathe without you? Feeling so cold. I'll be waiting right for you till the day you're home.
In the meantime, try and do something productive. Memorize the bones of the body. Learn to play a new instrument. Let us know what's going on. We want to hear from you. We really do. We miss you.
11:15, we'll go over kind of what we want to do for the week.
We are, in a matter of days, fundamentally changing everything about education.
In all the good times, I find myself.
Time for teaching and learning online.
New ways for us to collaborate and communicate.
B squared minus 4AC.
Riddles are a type of poem.
I know you like, oh my God, Ms. Grimes, you really gonna give us some work to do.
If I start this YouTube channel, maybe I'll become a rich YouTuber. What do you think about that, kid?
Been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it.
I know, things are crazy right now, but remember, this will pass.
From where we began, oh, I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
This is a really crazy time, and I know a lot of you have so many questions, so do I.
And I wish we were back together again, but I know we will be soon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're here together today because this is Public Schools Week. I know that tens of millions of Americans appreciate our public schools and what they mean to our country every day, but this is the week, once a year, for us to formally celebrate them. My name is Marla Yuseli-Keshap. I work at the American Federation of Teachers, and I have the honor of chairing the board of the Learning First Alliance, a key sponsor of Public Schools Week. If you don't know LFA, we're a group of a dozen national organizations that represent more than 10 million people who make our public schools work, as educators and administrators, as staff of all kinds, as well as school board members and parent leaders. We are all public school proud. And you can tweet about the amazing people you're about to meet using that hashtag and learn more about LFA at publicschoolproud.org. So our program today is called Speaking Up for Public Schools, Educators Finding Solutions in Uncertain Times. And uncertain times is an understatement of the multi-layered crises of the pandemic that we are all living through. We have a group of extraordinary educators, grouped in a couple of different configurations, to talk about some of the key issues impacting the children our members see every day. While the pandemic has been an unprecedented challenge, it's also given rise to some amazing ideas and strategies to meet those challenges. Our panelists will demonstrate that we as a profession know what needs to be done. As we get started, I want to acknowledge and thank some key supporters in Congress. Representative Mark Pocan, Democrat of Wisconsin, Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat of Oregon, Sam Graves, Republican of Missouri, and Glenn G.T. Thompson, Republican of Pennsylvania. Those four representatives led a bipartisan group of 94 members of Congress by introducing a resolution to recognize this week as Public Schools Week. And just today, Senator John Tester of Montana has introduced a similar bipartisan resolution with multiple co-sponsors on the Senate side. So with that said, why don't we get started? And let's start with a representative of the parents and families that our public schools serve, Leslie Boggs, who's president of the National PTA. Leslie.
Good day, everyone. As most of you know, our public schools provide all children access to opportunities, experiences, and knowledge, regardless of their race, religion, ability, or socioeconomic status, that improve their overall well-being and build the skills they need to succeed today and tomorrow. We count on our public schools to provide the educated, the innovative, and creative workforce of tomorrow, such as the entrepreneurs, engineers, scientists, artists, and political leaders that America needs to ensure that our nation flourishes in this competitive global economy. However, across the country, there are great disparities in the quality and access to equitable education opportunities. And decades of underinvestment in education has created unsustainable situations in so many of our nation's public schools, shortchanging our students. COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated educational inequalities. However, out of this crisis comes great opportunities. This next phase of returning to school is an important chance to ensure every child has every opportunity to reach their fullest potential, regardless of their zip code. And this next phase of returning to school has to include all stakeholders: parents, families, students, educators, school employees, school leaders, and their surrounding communities, because each of these stakeholders provide important information and perspective. At PTA, we have been bringing together families, educators, and business and community leaders for almost 125 years to solve problems facing our children, their families, and their schools. Working together is proven to make a difference for student success and school improvement efforts. When we work together, we are more powerful in creating change. Collectively, our voices are louder and stronger. Remember, all of you play an important role in the success of our public schools, which provide a better future for our nation and our nation's children. Together, we can build better schools and make every child's potential a reality. Thank you.
Leslie, thank you so much for that great start to our conversation. You mentioned some really important things, like the need for stakeholder engagement, the resources schools need, information. I wanted to ask as a follow-up, what kinds of tools are PTA members asking for around the country to help meet the needs of their children right now? Are there specific things that you're helping to provide?
There are, and what we're seeing across the nation as our PTAs are really trying to connect with their families and their teachers and their school community is that this virtual environment really has its own challenges, right? We know that there's a digital divide, which we need to really solve across this nation in order for everyone to be more successful. And what we're finding whenever our PTAs are talking to our families is that the mental health and social economic well-being of our students is top priority. Over 40% are asking for those resources, and they need access to great mental health. Our communities don't necessarily provide that easily, and they have trouble finding those resources. And so they're really asking for that help. And that's why PTA has put up a webpage solely on our pta.org for mental health to help provide those access and tools needed for them to be helpful to their students and to their families, especially during this crisis. The other thing that we're seeing, there's this disparity of food insecurities. They're challenged with an environment that they're having to be a teacher, right? And they never signed up for it. So they're wanting to know where their children stand. What kind of learning loss have we experienced over this year? All of these questions are foremost in their minds as they look forward to hopefully getting back in school, because all of them want to be back in school. That's their top priority, but they are worried about the health and safety of not only their children, but the teachers and their educational community. Because the only way they want them back in schools is when they know that's really been secure and is going to happen. And I think that speaks bounds for where we are as a nation.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Leslie. And certainly we're hearing a lot of the same things from our members as well. And some of what you talked about is actually a great segue into our first panel. that we're going to bring up and see in just a moment. And that panel includes Olivia Carter, who is School Counselor of the Year representing the American School Counselors Association, Kimberly White-Smith, who is a board member of LFA member organization AACTE, the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education, and Rosamond Looney, who I'm proud to say is an AFT member and is a first grade teacher in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. And so what we're going to try to do now, I'm going to ask a question and invite each of our three panelists to respond. I'll call you in turn, and then I hope we'll have time for a follow-up question or two. Excuse me. And we've asked all our panelists today to keep their responses brief, just so we can get to everyone, hear from everyone, and we'll be able to follow up, and we hope folks will feel free to reach out, share contact information, etc. So to our panel, and I'm going to start, Olivia, if I can, with you. Key question, and Leslie teased this for us, given that so many students have been impacted in so many ways by the pandemic, social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, mental health needs are going to be a top priority. They already are for educators now and going forward. So from this panel, we really want to hear, how is your school or your community of educators and school staff changing? What are you doing to meet this need? Olivia.
So this impact has been huge. And luckily for school counselors, we kind of get to stay the course with having the opportunity to use social emotional learning set forth by American School Counselor Association standards. We teach all students coping skills, self-care, and mindfulness. We want them to build a sense of belonging in our own school environment. At my school, we've implemented a number of practices that ensure students feel safe. So we have class meetings and restorative techniques that we've really used as a key to in-person and even virtual learning. We've also implemented calm down corners in all classrooms that allow students and staff to co-regulate if needed. So what all of these things really come down to is the connection and the relationships that we're building within and outside of our buildings. I have a former principal, and I love to quote her because her catchphrase is relationships first, relationships next, relationships always. And I think that's what's going to move us forward in education in general. And finally, I can't overstate the importance of this, is we've been very intentional. We were all in person about promoting wellness for our faculty and staff. So I send out a newsletter every week called Trauma Informed Tuesday. It has ideas for self-care. It has teacher support group information in it, different book clubs they can join. So that has been key. We've also, as a leadership team, we've put a lot of energy and intention into allowing our teachers to have a full 40 minutes of lunchtime and breaks away from students. Those three things have been our most trauma-informed practices that we bring every day.
Thank you so much. Lots to draw on and learn from there. I'm going to turn to Rosamond next, and from your perspective on the same question with the young ones that you teach.
Yeah, I mean, as Marla said, I'm a first grade teacher in Louisiana, and I've been teaching in person and then sometimes in person and virtually, or sometimes virtually, depending on quarantines this year. And so this year for my school, but for every school in America, has just been about safety first. And so unfortunately, that's meant that I've had to enforce, remind, teach about a lot of antisocial behaviors, especially for little kids, like don't share, please don't help that person, please stay in your area, please don't walk over there. And that's really heartbreaking because that's a part of my job to talk about and teach. And so one thing I really look forward to is when the pandemic is over, and especially over for kids in a school context. So when vaccines are rolled out for kids, that we will have to spend a lot of time reteaching the pro-social behaviors that we actually taught against. And then making kids feel safe while doing that. That like, it is safe to lean in when you talk to your friend. It is safe to share crayons with your friend now. And I'm really looking forward to being able to teach that again and teach back towards collaborative work and project-based learning.
Thanks so much, Rosamond. Now to turn to Kimberly, your perspective from those who help our educators and school staff and counselors get ready to do their really challenging jobs.
Absolutely. So I represent AACTE, and our member organizations represent community colleges as well as four-year institutions, both private and public. And we all serve the PK-12 public school education system. And I in particularly am the Dean of the Lefebvre College of Education at the University of La Verne, which resides on Tongva lands. And we hope that the work that we're doing honors the ancestors and the indigenous people still connected to those lands. But I believe that AACTE organization members really work to dismantle the myth of the ivory tower in higher education. And I think our member organizations really exemplify how an agenda centered on access and development of high quality profession-ready teachers, counselors, school psychologists, and leaders can be used to address the inequities highlighted by the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice, and the need to center community mental health. Before the pandemic, we were lucky enough to support the development of a Center for Neurodiversity, Learning, and Wellness at my institution at the University of La Verne. And we kind of focused on four central areas. One, in order to engage trauma-informed practices that are centered on healing and not mislabeling students of color, our programming is informed by neuroscience and neurobiology. We train our teachers and our educators to look at the data and to look at the ways that the brain is formed and how learning happens, so that when you see a student's ACE score, it's not just a number, but you know how it informs your instruction to bolster student learning and success. We develop highly skilled profession-ready teachers through intentional exposure to a variety of traditional and innovative teaching and learning modalities, face-to-face, hybrid, fully online, multi-age settings. So those platforms can be used to support community building and a sense of belonging. And then diversifying the educator workforce is another component in helping students see people that look like them and help to lower their affective filter in the classroom. So really working collaboratively with our community partners to develop pipelines of excellence from the communities into our spaces of higher education to increase the number of BIPOC teachers in our most culturally, racially, and linguistically diverse communities. And then again, I just want to echo, mindfulness practices are really important in helping to engage empathy and help in order to be reflective on our own anti-bias practices and to support well-being in schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And I think sometimes it's hard for folks to keep up with just how much teacher preparation and educator preparation has changed to adapt to new knowledge. So it's really good to hear that. I think we have time for a couple of follow-ups. So I want to ask Olivia and Rosamond if you would reflect on two things. One, a strategy that you've used for the students in your care that's been just super successful, maybe in a way that you didn't think about, just something that worked really well. And then also, is there something that you would hope parents and the general public know about what's going on for educators right now that maybe they don't really get? What's one thing that you would want them to know to be able to help and support their kids even better than they're doing right now? And either one of you can start.
I can start, Olivia. One, as I mentioned, I teach first grade. And so I noticed that a lot of my students and students' families were expressing reservations and concerns this year about using the healthcare system, whether it was mental health or going to the doctors or getting tested or worries about the vaccine. And so obviously, it's not my place to mandate, require, push anything, but I did feel like an important part of working with students of color and primarily immigrant students was sort of saying, like, here are the kinds of options that are available for you. that you can use if you and your family can use if you would like. And so with my class, I have a class mascot. It's a little bear. And so I took the bear home, and then they were like, "Where's Mr. Bear?" And then I said, "Mr. Bear had to go to the doctor." And then they said, "Oh, do bears get COVID-19? Like, what's happening with Mr. Bear? When's he coming back?" And I was like, Mr. Bear had to go to the doctor. He has to get checked out. We're going to see. He's getting a test. And then my fiance took him to urgent care and took a photo by urgent care. I was like, here's the update. Mr. Bear's at urgent care. And so we did a whole play-by-play, and then it was like, Mr. Bear's feeling better. Why isn't he back? Mr. Bear's not back yet because he still has to recover. Even though his test was negative, he still needs to feel better before he comes back. Like, to visualize and explain, what does it mean to be quarantined? Like, what does it mean to go to the doctor? And to normalize that you're not, you don't have to feel unsafe if you do that. And I understand there are a lot of reasons why people feel unsafe to go to the doctor or unsafe to access public services. And so to talk about like ways that can be okay for you as an option that you can choose. So yeah, I guess I would sum that up by saying that I think we need to talk more about messaging to students and families about healthcare, about the options, but then about like helping them find culturally competent and relevant care providers.
Thank you. Olivia.
Yeah, I love that example. I love the bear. I might use that. I might steal it. But for me, I think something that's very simple, just around trauma-informed practices. I mentioned class meetings. I started those years ago, but they've been so essential this year. And I think the reason why is, well, part of it is the restorative piece. I work with K through 5th grade. So for our teachers at the beginning of the year, we had a very frank conversation. We actually had a restorative circle where it was twofold. I got to model that restorative process that they could then use in their classrooms. And then the other part of it was they really got to express the grief and the pain that, the lost year that they had last year. And then of course we started August 24th. So then also those fears that we have coming back in person with no vaccines. And of course our district tried to keep people as safe as possible. And we have been as safe as possible, I think, but there were some very real fears that our teachers needed a minute to discuss. And so I think that was huge for our teachers because, like I said, it was modeling and it was a place that was very safe for them to grieve and to express their own emotions. And I think that was our most effective use of our time during our back to school work days.
Great. Thank you so much. Great examples from both of you. And Kimberly, I'm going to ask you to just wrap up this panel with try to answer this question. We have been concerned a lot of late that not enough people are going into the teaching profession and more maybe leaving now because times are really challenging. And I wonder if you can think about how there might be ways to turn this crisis into an opportunity to build a more diverse teaching profession as you described.
Sure. There are many examples from our member organization. I'll give you one that I use at my institution. So we have developed intentional partnerships with our local districts that really, are in need of teachers in order to help support any students or any teachers that they are currently using that might be on emergency permit or that might need extra support so that they can actually come into a teacher preparation program, have a mentor teacher, have a university supervisor, get the support that they need so that they're not out there on their own. But developing these partnerships and developing these pipelines from the community into our higher ed spaces and back into the communities that we serve has really been one of the strongest ways to do this. Also, leveraging our minority serving institutions. Our HSIs produce 80% of our Latinx teachers in the country. Our HBCUs produce 50% of our Black teachers across the country. So also recruiting from our minority serving institutions into our communities is definitely also a way to diversify the teacher workforce.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, panel. This is, you've given us some inspiring ideas and stories to move forward with. So I appreciate that as we transition to the next group that we're going to meet. And that group is Richard Gordon, who is National Principal of the Year and joining us as a representative of the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Leslie Bruinton, who is the president this year of the National School Public Relations Association, and Kimbrell Barbosa Lewis, who is the president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals. So we have our wonderful leaders and administrators with us. And I'm gonna start off with a challenging question, a challenge that we're all facing right now. And also, I hope you'll tell us a little more about yourself as you address the question. Of course, we know that schools are reflections of our communities and our society. Our social and racial justice crisis, and some might even say crisis in democracy and civics overall, are impacting schools dramatically. So how are your schools? How is what you do changing and adapting to meet and address these challenges? And Richard, I'm going to ask you to start us off, if you would.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. I just want to talk about really that this opportunity we have in front of us is really to address the issue of really resetting priorities and identifying like how we're engaging with our families and our communities, and and identifying what's most important. And so right now, what we've been able to do and learn from this experience is understanding that that we are not going to be able to advance forward and to improve the conditions that our students have experienced during this pandemic without having a true reconciliation of the discriminatory institutional discriminatory practices that have been taking place over the course of decades. And we have to have some type of reconciliation around that. So, and then at the same time, we have to go beyond just college and career readiness. And so what we've been engaging in here at Robeson High School through a number of our partnerships is identifying how schools can play a part in addressing poverty in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, for example, is known as the largest big city, the largest city with the largest amount of poverty, unfortunately, at 26%. Out of the top 10 cities around the country. And so we have to start really taking a look at some of our anchor institutions like our schools to address not just the academics, but also how can we leverage our partnerships in the communities to start addressing a lot of the poverty problems that are providing us, that are considered to be obstacles preventing our schools to advance, where we have a caste system where, the cream is rising to the top. Unfortunately, it's leaving behind about 75% of our school population. And so we have to really start to address that. And so the pandemic has really, during these times, has really exposed that a lot. And it's an opportunity to really start to have, all community institutions to start to really address that.
Serious business. Thank you so much, Richard. Leslie, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a really interesting premise, especially for my particular community. We are proud to serve more than 11,000 students in the Tuscaloosa City Schools. We're in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That's about an hour outside of the largest city, Birmingham, Alabama, which of course is one of the places where the civil rights movement had great prominence for. And so our students in this school system are a diverse group of students. It is the Title I district. I think what is probably interesting about our school system is that our demographics of our school system are the inverse of the demographics of the city. So we're about 73% African American, 23% white, and then we round out the 100% with students from other ethnicities. So our student population is the inverse of it. Tuscaloosa has had made headlines as far as in the civil rights movement, and as far as some other issues related to racial diversity here. And our students in 2019 at one of our 3 high schools said, it's just not enough what we're learning. Black History Month, the month of February, is just not enough. What we're learning in our history curriculums and our social studies classes is just not enough. We'd like to have a course dedicated to studying more about Black history. So our administrators at one of our high schools worked with folks at the University of Alabama. That's the town that we're in. We're in a college town. They worked with folks at the University of Alabama to create curriculum, to create a class focused on, as it's called, History of Us. So the students in this one particular school get to study for a year-long curriculum, things like Reconstruction, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, and they even look at local documents as it affected civil rights right here in Tuscaloosa. They take a tour of the Civil Rights Trail here in Tuscaloosa. It was piloted at one of our schools in 2019, and then, of course, we have 3 high schools. So after a while, the popularity of this class spread out across the neighborhoods, and folks are wondering, when do we get it at the other 2 high schools? So that's something that we're looking to be able to expand. But, the pandemic did stop a lot of those kinds of activities many of our schools had in place to be able to offer more innovative curriculums. But this class, I think, really goes to show you what happens when you work and partner with communities. You're responsive to students. You deliver programming that students want. And it's going well. We've got news coverage of it. So if this is something that's of interest to you, then by all means, you can Google History of Us, Tuscaloosa. You'll find a news article about that, or you can get a hold of my contact information. I'll put you in touch with the administrators here. But I think not only is it timely for the students in Tuscaloosa, this was something that was important to them. It predated a lot of the conversations that we saw nationally last summer to be able to have a course like this. So we're pleased to be able to meet that need that our students here in Tuscaloosa have.
Thanks so much, Leslie. That is really inspiring. That sounds terrific. I know a lot of people are going to be Googling that when this conversation is over, if they're not doing it already. And I just want to say that one of the things that we try to do is make some really good free resources available to educators who might not have those kind of partnerships close at hand. And on sharemylesson.com, we have some collections of anti-racist and social justice teaching, but that is an inspiring local example. Kim Brell, tell us about your school and what you're doing.
Hi, everyone. My school is Cordova Elementary, and Cordova is outside of the Memphis, Tennessee area. And in many ways, my county and my district reflect differently than other parts of the state. We are the largest district in the state and the, of course, largest district of color. Working with pre-K through 5th grade students, specifically at my school, it's very important that we acknowledge the social injustice that is happening in the way that young children understand it. So we know that high school students have a voice of their own. And when you talk about young kindergarten, 1st grade, preschool students, and even up to 5th grade, how do we hear that from them? And so it's very important for our teachers to use their training. We have an equity champion that helps us to train our teachers on having these types of conversations. As we talk about social emotional learning, we also use restorative circles, but we use them to also talk about these very things. As a school leader, also, I have to know my families. I have to know my parents, my students. How has this social justice impacted them personally, especially here in Memphis, where there is quite a large divide racially, logistically, where we live. Our district is a full Title I district. And however, the municipalities surrounding us are not. And so we have to understand the context in which that our students live and how we can help those young students, to be able to talk about it in their circles every day, and for us to check in with our families. Unfortunately, like many of you, our district has had to be remote. We've been remote all year and preparing for elementary schools to go back next week. What I've found is the one very positive part of this is that we are having even more parents connect virtually. So having those regular communication sessions with our parents and getting to hear from them, it's given them the opportunity when they couldn't come to the school because several of them work more than one job and can't take off. They're able to talk to us about what they need, what their children are struggling with, how seeing what they've seen on TV happen to people that look like them hurts them, affects them, and how they want to talk about it. Also, in representing my organization, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, it's important for the organizations that we lead to help impact what our school leaders do. So NEAC has prioritized taking a look at racial equity and injustice. So we've developed a national task force on race and equity. And through that task force, we are embarking upon training for our members, for principals around the country, to talk about implicit bias, because we all have it. How do we begin to change that in our schools? We now have developed equity audits that our school leaders can use to look at how we lead, how our school is doing school-wide in truly addressing what does our curriculum look like? Does it embody what our students live every day? Does it reflect our students? And then also when we talk about our teachers, how are our classrooms mirroring what we're speaking about and making sure that even though systematically our students and in our communities we experience injustice based on race and background, how can we begin to change that based on the true facts of what's happening in our school?
Thank you so much, Kimbrell. All of your examples are really inspiring and helpful. And I wonder I think we have time for a couple of follow-ups. And so I wonder, just hearing about what you're doing in Philadelphia, Tuscaloosa, and Memphis, you've clearly thought about this a lot. You know the impact of institutionalized racism, and you recognize the role of schools despite the challenges that the schools themselves might face in addressing this. So I wonder if you would give some advice to school leaders who are starting out, especially if they're in places where it's not been as front and center for the young people that they face. How can we make this real? It needs to be real for all of our students. What advice would you give to your colleagues to embark on some of the steps that you've taken? Richard, you want to start?
Sure. I think Principal Lewis has really brought up a really good point in terms of looking at student voices and giving them the space to actually share their feelings and their thoughts particularly about their futures. And so again, at Robeson High School, we have a platform called Build Your Own Brand. It is, we want to facilitate the opportunity for our students to actually share with us, what pathway towards success and how you envision your life beyond high school. What does that look like for you? And it's our job to actually connect our students and leverage those community resources to help our students to forge that pathway, no matter how unique that pathway might be, because we have to figure out new ways to engage our students and to engage our families to address all of these issues so that they have to overcome. And so we have to make sure that we are engaging them in pathways that are traditional and non-traditional. There are so many opportunities out there that students are just not aware of, that are job opportunities and career opportunities. We do have to engage them in a way and making sure that they learn the difference between a job and a career, and in understanding that the importance of this work is going to be directed and leveraged based on their voices, so that we can get our community resources involved in all of our institutions that are supporting students in the area, to make sure that we are directing resources and supports around the needs and the wants and desires of our students and our families. Because too often what happens, particularly in school districts, is that when we don't have enough parental interaction, we often dictate to our families what school is going to look like, rather than giving them the opportunity to share with us what they want to see in the schools that are serving their children. And so we have to leverage those voices, to leverage those resources to support our families and our students. And school leaders should really pay attention to making sure that they are always paying attention to what those voices are in their own buildings.
Great advice. Thank you. Leslie, you want to go next?
I would echo what Principal Gordon said. You know, as the president of the National School Public Relations Association, a key foundation to the work that we do is understanding your audience. That's exactly what Principal Gordon just talked about. Just from my perspective, as school PR practitioners, we do that a little bit differently. So making sure that you're having focus groups or surveys or any kind of feedback gathering tools that you as a school administrator can use to learn more about your community. I think it's important when we're talking about this work, whether it's racial reconciliation or noticing the differences between racial injustice and having those conversations around civil rights, that this is courage building work. Previously in my career, I worked for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and I know just from, you know, that having that opportunity, the work in this area is hard. You may take a few knocks, but it's courageous work. It's important work and it's powerful. I would also say that, you know, for our members in our association, not everyone is on the same in the same place in the journey. Some of us are further along than others, and it's okay that another school system is further along or another school is further along than you are in that journey. Just keep pressing forward. I mean, a lot of times as school leaders, we look to what other school systems are doing. And as my coworkers say, we admire and acquire. Do that if you can, but also know that it's all right wherever you are on that journey as you're pushing forward. I don't think it's a surprise that I would say, you know, you can't move any faster than your community would want you to move on these particular issues at hand. But it is important for you to work with your community. And the way that you do that is to get to know your community and understand what their needs are, what their concerns are, what their goals are as a community, and how you can move that forward. So that's going to be important to you, whether you're an administrator that's been with your district for 25 years and maybe you're, you know, just getting to a decision-making role where you can be able to affect change, or if you're new to your district. It's really easy for those of us who move into a district to look around and say, these are the things I would do differently. But recognize you joined that community and you've got to move at the speed and the pace of that community, because that's going to help you build trust. So, you know, from the National School Public Relations Association, I would say get to know your audience. That's going to be top and key to helping you implement a successful program that will withstand the test of time.
Or good advice. Thank you, Leslie. Kimbrell.
So I really feel like Principal Gordon and Ms. Brewington have said some fantastic things. I only have a little bit to add because they have really shared some really insightful things that I personally will take to heart. And so that brings me to this. Knowing your audience, knowing your community, you have to build connections. And so I would say that most of us within the organizations we work in have equity departments, right? But what are your equity departments doing? What resources are offered to you and your community directly? And being in a large school district, as Principal Gordon is, sometimes we don't know what all those resources are. So you have to connect in that respect. Also, this week, my school board member reached out to me, which reached out to all of us. And it is so important that your school board knows what your area needs and helps with that. She offered her services. We're right now we don't have clean water in our district, in our whole county because of the last storm that we just had. And so how does that impact most people? Well, it impacts those who are of color and poor more than most, right? Because if we have to go buy water, who has the funds to do that? So she reached out and said, hey, I'm giving away water. I want you to help me. Let me know who needs it. Send this to your parents. So how do you address those little things that seem little, but they're really big to your family? Utilize those school board members, utilize those connections, and then connections with colleagues. I have learned this year in being NAEA's president more than I've ever learned before from colleagues. Every day I called colleagues for help, but now getting ideas from across the country, like from you all, is helping me to know how to implement things that will support my school, especially when it comes to race and equity and justice for my students. I'm learning even more just from making those connections. So I think that's really, really important.
Wonderful. Thank you all three for your insights and inspirations. Really appreciate it. Now we're going to have a short video that I know you'll enjoy, and it comes from Dr. Benjamin Chavez. Dr. Chavez is a longtime activist and civil rights leader who is now the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and NNPA represents the Black press of America. Let's hear from Dr. Chavez.
On behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the NNPA, we're very pleased to join the 2021 Public School Week. We thank Education First, we thank all of our partners, but the biggest stakeholders are those families, those parents, those students, those children, those communities that so vitally need a good, high quality education. And so there are three issues. One is equal access. We want to make sure that African-American students and other persons of color have equal access to the best high quality education, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are issues in our community that challenge some of the distant education because broadband access is not equally distributed in a lot of our communities. So there are some technical challenges, there's some technical hurdles that have to be overcome in distance education. And in practicing all of the Center for Disease Control mandates on what it would be to have safe public schools reopening, we want to make sure that all those guidelines are followed for all children, but particularly those in underserved communities. I think one of the reasons why African Americans and other persons of color are so devastated by COVID-19 is because of the pre-existing conditions. Not just pre-existing health conditions, which are major, but also pre-existing environmental conditions, pre-existing socioeconomic conditions. All these things come together to impinge upon whether or not children from the communities in which we serve have equal access. So that's very important. Number two, we want to make sure that the curriculum and that the provision of education is of the highest quality, that the educational programs and the curriculum and the resources are not only culturally sensitive, but give our young people the best chance to excel in school. Overall, we want to bridge the education gap. We don't want this pandemic to widen the education gap. And I believe that our young people in our communities, and I know as a parent, as a grandparent myself, I know how important it is for families to be engaged in the educational process. So we're encouraging all of our parents, as well as young people, to take public education very seriously. And I know during the previous 4 years, there was sort of a backing off of having a strong commitment to public education. On behalf of the Black press of America, we want to reassert that it is vital to the health and welfare of our nation, of the United States of America, to have the strongest, the most advanced public education system. And that means we have to have the best trained teachers, the best trained administrators, but it also means we need all of our parents to be engaged. It's just not about sending your kid off somewhere to get an education. The parents have to accompany their kids to make sure that the education process is in their interest. I want to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for assisting the National Newspaper Publishers Association in making some provisions so that we can work with educators. And we thank some of the panelists during this 2021 Public Education Week. We thank all of the researchers. We thank all of the scholars that have written papers and take a public position. We thank all of the organizations that we work for. I just want to let you know that the Black press, we support our public schools. We support public education. We support equality and equity in the provision of education. Another thing that the Biden-Harris administration has focused on, which we agree with, is the question of equity. Equity in the allocation of resources, equity in making sure that all of the advances in innovation and technology, that those advances and innovations are also accessible by the communities in which we serve. So I come to 2021 Public Education Week with a sense of renewed optimism. I have great hope. I know there's a yearning, there's a hunger and a thirst for truth and for the best education among our communities, among our families. And I just want our educators this week to know that the Black press supports you. We salute you, and we should maintain whatever partnerships we can create to make sure that everybody takes seriously how important our public school systems are. We need to strengthen our public schools. Our teachers need better and higher salaries. Our administrators need more support. And we need those public policy decisions and made at the congressional level and also made at the state legislative level, as well as the county level. We need all public policies to enhance and to strengthen our public school system. I believe that 2021 should be the turnaround year where we can regain some of what was lost during the height of the pandemic. The pandemic is still very high. I don't want anybody to relax. We still have to social distance. We still have to wash our hands. We still have to wear those masks. And we have to follow the guidelines for public schools that are being re-updated regularly by the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. But please, those who are listening to this message, know that we support you. We have 230 African-American owned newspapers across the country, and a lot of them focus on education issues, public education issues, public school system issues that we will continue to follow and to address. This is the 194th year of the Black Press of America. And for the last 194 years, since Freedom Journal was first published in 1827, in New York City, the Black press has been on the front line, not only reporting the news, but we are an advocate for freedom, justice, and equality. And we are an advocate for a strong, sustainable public school system. God bless you, and we salute you on 2021 Public Education Week. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate that message from Dr. Chavez and the work of the Black press in America, and those reminders as well that he shared. We really appreciate that support. And actually, some of the themes that Dr. Chavez raised about equity and access particularly, I think are going to come up in our next and final panel of the day. So let's bring those colleagues on right now. Richard Gordon. Oops, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong panel. It's Peter Just I'm looking for. And Peter is here as a representative of the Consortium for School Networking. We have Eric Books from representing Learning Forward, who's a Chief Academic Officer in Yuma. And we have Charlie Wilson, who is the current president of the National School Boards Association, and of course, a local school board member as well. So welcome, Peter, Eric, Charlie. The question I hope you can address with us is about student learning and the pandemic's impacts. We know, as many have talked about already, that current inequities have been exacerbated for too many. And while some students actually can thrive in an online learning environment, at least for part of the time, for many, it's not an optimal way to learn, and certainly not as a sole way of learning. So what we really want to talk about now is to kind of think forward to both what you're doing now and going forward in terms of addressing pandemic inequities and thinking about learning beyond COVID and how we accelerate and recover from the pandemic to provide all students the opportunity that they need. Peter, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. I think certainly in the last year, much has been revealed, and I think we can move forward from this point, knowing some of those things. At the Consortium of School Networking, our technology leaders have really been dealing with the fallout of some real access inequities in many of our school districts that affect so many of our schools. We know that this summer, there was a study that was done by the Alliance for Excellent Education and some others that showed that nearly 17 million students don't have high-speed internet access at home. And it won't surprise any of us to know that the lack of broadband access is mostly experienced in Black, Brown, and Indigenous homes. So clearly a line exists there that we need to try to erase and try to make right. So COSN actually announced today a study that we've been working on to develop bandwidth recommendations for homes. We've had something like this for schools for a long time, but we're doing a study right now with a number of school districts. My district is one of those that's actually taking a look at trying to close the digital divide by taking a look at so much of the data that we have now. These Zoom calls actually collect data about our connections, and we can examine that information privately, of course, to take a look at where we might have weaknesses and try to create some visualizations to help schools make better decisions in terms of how they can use their resources. For many school districts, this means MiFi units. For many urban areas like Indianapolis, where I'm at, it's a consortium of schools that are trying to do more than just MiFi access, because we have homes with multiple families, we have homes with many students, and we have homes where parents are having to work from home. A MiFi doesn't meet the need there. So trying to get beyond just that simple solution is what we're working towards, and trying to set standards for home access across the country. And the folks at the in DC at the FCC have started to look at what can they do through E-rate and other federal programs to be able to help bridge that bandwidth gap. Here in Wayne Township in Indianapolis, we reflect the population that's racially a third Black, a third Hispanic, and a third white, with a high degree of poverty across all of those. And for us, we wanted to start really not start. We have a great community here, but to continue to increase our engagement with our families through our homeschool liaisons, but also surveying parents for their needs. Parents are more involved now than ever before in the education of their students. They've had their eyes opened in terms of what other options exist. And public schools specifically need to rise to the occasion of meeting those needs. And in many cases, that's really working more closely with parents and understanding what their needs are. For us, we've provided study tables that are staffed by our teachers after hours, before school, virtual, some in person when we've been able to be in person, paid for by stimulus and CARES Act dollars. The communication with the households has been really more than just routine communication. It's been really trying to provide data to those parents where their students stand, if they're on pace or if they're not, how we can support them. And this is through phone calls, meets like this or Zoom calls, even front porch conversations. We've had quite a few administrators having conversations on a front porch with a parent at the door, because that's just going to be the best way we're going to be able to get the job done. And the community really appreciates the fact that we're trying to give the families everything that they need to be able to be successful. And so as we look at the future, I think it's going to be shifting our delivery method, being able to provide additional study tables and other types of helps to families as well as directly to students. That's a big part of our strategy going forward.
Thanks so much, Pete. That's often the way I think of our public schools, pulling every resource possible together in support of students. Let's turn to Eric Brooks next. Eric.
Okay, so as we talk about resourcefulness, I think one of the things that we try to concentrate on at Learning Forward and in our partnership with our district, the Union High School District, we are 6 high schools, is the idea of the pandemic has certainly revealed things that we cannot control. But it also revealed some things and reminded us some things that we can control. And the human capital are the things that we can control. So one of the things that we spent some time doing and expending our energy is in regards to our teachers. And so in order to create an equitable environment for all of our students, we really need to make sure that our teachers have an equitable environment for the students that they serve. And we do that a number of ways. One of the things that we've kept consistent since the beginning of the pandemic is the fact that we've shortened our school day and we've had from 1 to 3 in the afternoon available for our teachers to spend time in their PLC work, to spend time doing a number of things. And what that afternoon time, we've kept that sacred for a variety of reasons. One is the fact that we know that job-embedded professional development is a type of professional development that is really going to stick with teachers. If I'm a veteran teacher who's taught for 25 or 30 years, this whole pandemic thing has put in front of me different technologies that I'm not used to. So that 1 to 3 time slot allows me to pull a younger teacher aside and say, hey, I got this Nearpod, Jamboard, Padlet thing I'm trying to do. Can you help me understand that? And it's at a time when they can actually sit down to a virtual space, have a great conversation, and figure that out. By the same token, if I'm a new teacher, I need to figure out how to go from factoring polynomials to dividing quotients. And then, because I've never taught that before, and now I'm doing it in a virtual space, a veteran teacher can then look at me and say, okay, here's probably your best way to transition from here to there. And so allowing that time to really spend, or just to spend that time, the 3 of us who all teach English together, to kind of talk about, okay, what's a great next step for us to take? What are the power standards that we need to make sure that all of our students know, learn, and can do well? There's been a lot of things in our curriculum that we've allowed that happen, obviously during a normal school year, during a normal time. But when you have a limited amount of time with students, and you have a limited number of students who are coming in front of you, whether it be hybrid, whether it be in-person learning, whether it be remote learning, when you have fewer students coming in front of you, what are the things that you need to make sure that they know about your content so that as we go forward, that they're able to capture and to do well? Also, the one last thing that time allows us to do is, as a number of people alluded to, we spend a lot of time reaching out to our students. One of the things that we are most proud of is in our district of 11,300 students, approximately, there are only about 350 to 400 students who we have not been able to have consistent contact with. And that's because in that afternoon time, we spend a lot of time calling our students, doing wellness checks, calling our students, asking them, okay, I know you weren't in class today. Do you have any questions about the assignment? Or letting parents know, yes, your student has been checking in, and yes, your student has been doing the assignments. Here's where they're faltering, and here's where they could use some assistance. So really making sure that we give teachers that time during the school day, because as we well know, teachers aren't exempt from the pandemic. We all have families, we all have things that when we go home, we still are dealing with the fact that we have to go to the grocery store. We still are dealing with all of those other things that the pandemic holds. So we allow our teachers to take care of the things that they need to take care of for work during the school day, so that way in the evening, they can be there for their families. And in doing that, we really know it's providing a better model for our students and is a better teacher for the students that they serve.
Thank you, Eric. You just identified a whole bunch of what I call scary teacher problems and managed to talk about solving them all at the same time. It was really wonderful to hear. Charlie, can we get the perspective of a school board member?
Marla, besides being president of the National School Boards Association, representing 90,000 locally elected school boards members, I'm also, as you mentioned, a locally elected school board member in Worthington, Ohio. We are a highly diverse school district with 11,000 students and 19 school buildings, with several Title I buildings and several very affluent buildings, students coming from very affluent communities. Our demographics are roughly comparable to the demographics of America. We have some of the poorest students in the country. We have some of the wealthiest students in the country, and our demographics similarly are extremely diverse. After the pandemic began, my school board passed a resolution proclaiming that we will be an anti-racist school district. We know that to believe in a racial hierarchy is to believe in a racist idea. Clearly, the idea of an achievement gap between the races, with whites and Asian Americans at the top and Blacks and Latinx students at the bottom, creates a racial hierarchy. That leaves the implication or suggestion that the racial gap in test scores means something is wrong with the Black and Latinx test takers and not with the tests themselves. From the very beginning, we know that the tests, not the students, have always been the racial problem. Tests are definitely skewed to best serve students with a white middle-class upbringing. We all know tests do not measure a student's potential. The racial problem in education is not the achievement gap, it is the opportunity gap. Definitely not the so-called achievement gap. So we as a board are focusing on the opportunity gap and removing the focus from that so-called achievement gap. We no longer refer to or focus on or talk about or use the term achievement gap, because achievement gap means that something is lacking on the part of the students and not with the tests. I think that is an extremely important distinction. It's not about a so-called achievement gap because that implies a lack of ability. Instead, it's all about a lack of opportunity and a lack of access for our students who come from communities that don't have the resources that their other peers have. In addition, our board, since the pandemic has begun, is focused on the fact that at risk is another term that we absolutely must stop using. To be labeled at risk is not a term that will make students feel all good and fuzzy and warm and woolly about themselves. Just as I was a child growing up called trailer trash by virtually every school teacher and every school principal I had, did not cause me to come to school feeling I could achieve, or that I felt good about myself, or that there was something here for me. Similarly, calling kids at-risk students does nothing for them. And finally, as a school board, we believe the focus must not be on so-called student deficits. Instead, it should be on the structure or the policy that imposes barriers that prevent our students from reaching their full potential. It is better to use, in my opinion, the term, much as Dr. Chavez did, the term students from underserved communities, which puts the onus where it belongs, on us, on our institutions, and on our policies. That's what my district is doing right now, ensuring that we are not telling children that they are inferior, nor are we focusing on their failings. Instead, we as a school district are focused on the institutional racism that got the student in the situation that she is in now. And instead, we focus on the opportunity gaps in our educational system.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It was really well said. And just hearing from the three of you, whether you're working on the infrastructure, the human capital, the policy, and in fact, even the language itself, so impacts the opportunities and the experiences that students will have. I think we probably have time for maybe just one follow-up. So I'd love to do that and to get each of your thoughts on looking ahead to what we hope will be maybe the first normal year of schooling in a bit, starting this fall. And what are the things you will be most looking to continue to think differently about? When I talk to teachers, they tell me, we want to get back to schools the way they were in the sense of being with our students, but we know we're never going to go back to being exactly the way we were in terms of the way we teach, the way we use technology, the way we think of each other as human beings. So I wonder if each of you would give a thought to sort of what is a positive change that you want to build on coming out of the pandemic, something that you're going to continue to do differently or try differently. As a result of where we are right now, again, with this mindset of equity and access.
I'll be happy to start.
Thanks, Pete.
I think the word is agency. I think whether we were talking about teachers or whether we're talking about families, students, I think the word is agency. Teachers have been, turbocharged on how to use technology. It didn't happen in March or April. It takes a little bit of time. We know that when we're developing online teachers, it takes typically 2 years. They had 2 weeks. And so now they have come into their own, understanding the tool set, and I think that will change how they teach. The pedagogy will shift, I think, and giving them the agency to do that, I think, is critical for our homes, for our households, for our families, giving them the agency to have options. Our online school that's been around since 2000 has always been high school focused. We're going to give parents an option of having a blended school down to kindergarten if they'd like to choose that. We see that as probably transitional for most students. I don't think anyone's going to be in there for their entire elementary career, but for families that need that, giving them the option will be critical. And so we're working on ramping that up right now, hiring a principal here in the next 2 weeks. So I think as well for students, giving them options in terms of how they can learn, in terms of how they can get back up to speed if they feel that they are not where they need to be, through these study tables and other tools that we have, that many of which are technical and they love. So I think agency is the key word moving forward for us.
Excellent, thank you. Eric.
I would tag along with that. I think personalized learning and the idea that so many of us during this time have needed grace and choice. And when I say grace, I know oftentimes people say, oh, that's going to water down the curriculum. It's really not about that. It's really about allowing students to show how they master the content that you're teaching. And so I think what the pandemic has really taught us, and what I'm excited about going forward as I hear our teachers talk, is the fact that the choice boards and the allowing a student to say, okay, I've taught the Revolutionary War. I'm going to have some students give a presentation. I'm going to have some students write a paper, and I'm going to have some students do an oral quiz with me, because I know that that's their best way to demonstrate to me that they mastered the content. I no longer have to have a quiz on every Friday to make sure that everyone can move along at the same pace. We have a strong redo retake policy that's only been strengthened throughout this pandemic, because as we all kind of struggle and get through this, we realize that some of the students who come to us, and a good portion of the students who come to us, don't have access to certain things, or don't have, a clean table to sit at every night and do the work that they're asked to do. And so keeping those things in mind allow us as teachers and allow us to, as educators, to say, I know it's due on Thursday. Keep in mind, if you can't get it to me by Thursday, as long as we're communicating and get it to me a little later and you've mastered the content and you can show me that you've mastered the content, that's what's most important to me. And so again, I want to make sure that the picture is painted, not that curriculum is being watered down or anything like that. It's actually teaching them in real, what real life is. One of our greatest goals is to prepare them for college and career. Well, we all know that as we've been given accommodations as employees of whatever company we work for, whatever school district we work for, we've been given accommodations that as adults we do that. So we're helping our students kind of learn the fact that, hey, life is oftentimes about second chances, or life isn't, there's not a fast deadline where you have to know everything today. There are plenty of opportunities to make sure that you continue learning, and it motivates them to continue learning. So that's what I'm most excited about, is our teachers continue to talk about various ways that they're going to challenge that or champion that.
Love that. Thank you so much, Eric. Charlie.
Yeah, Marla, I think and I certainly hope there are 4 things that come out of this pandemic for us with respect to the educational setting. First, as Eric mentioned, individualized instruction. Our teachers in our district are doing a phenomenal job of providing individualized learning opportunities for our students in remote and hybrid settings. And I earnestly hope that focus on individualized instruction, meeting each and every student where she is and not where we want her to be, is one of the outcomes of this pandemic. Number two, less seat time for some students. For some students, they are absolutely thriving on our remote and hybrid instruction because they're self-starters, they've got plans, they have ambitions, and they have the resources at home, and they don't need to come in every day. They don't need to be in a classroom. Give them a project and they'll go out and do it. So for some students, I hope it means less seat time and we stop obsessing about seat time. On the other hand, for some students, number three, more seat time. Some students, frankly, don't have the resources at home, don't have the opportunities at home. There's that opportunity gap. And we need to provide more for them, whether it be in the elementary school level, a better before school and after school care, whether it be supper for some students, whether it be opportunities for tutoring, both during the school year, on weekends, and definitely in the summer. The fourth thing I hope comes out of this is a focus on mastery, grading, or learning. And that is, let's not move students on until they've mastered what they are, the chapter, the unit they're on right now. Let's move them on after they've mastered it. Let's stop obsessing so much about grade banding. Let's certainly keep cohorts of social groups together. I am definitely opposed to holding students back when it's not in their best social and emotional interests. But we can't let students get behind. In our school district, our teachers have done a phenomenal job with formative assessments and making sure that they don't move a student on until the student is ready to move on. So I hope we move away from the obsession with summative assessments and really focus on formative assessments, and along with eliminating or reducing our obsession with summative assessments, I hope we will cut back at both the federal and state level on these standardized tests that really just tell us about the tests and the homes the kids come from and nothing about the kids.
Thank you so much, Charlie, and thanks to this panel. And as I've seen with all three of our panels, this combination of experience and wisdom in how schools work best, and at the same time, a constant eye toward the innovation that's going to take us to what our young people need from us as the adults who make these systems work for them. We have one more speaker to hear from today, who's going to help us bring it home in terms of the reason why we have and need Public Schools Week, and that is Becky Pringle. And Becky is coming to us on video. Becky is the president of the NEA, the National Education Association, but I think she prefers to be referred to as a teacher from Pennsylvania. Let's hear from Becky.
Thank you, Marla, and a big thanks to the incredible panel of experts, and to all of you out there listening today who are champions for our nation's public schools. Because you know something? We need to celebrate our public schools, and not just this week, because it's the designated one, but every week. I truly believe this to my core. The creation of the American public school system is one of this nation's greatest inventions and this nation's most important promise. The hard work and solutions being discussed today are both a testament and a source of inspiration to all of us who are invested in our public school system. But we can't do it alone. We need the support of political leaders and the public. That is why, as difficult as this moment in our nation's history has been, we are also in the midst of a great opportunity. The nation has been forced to see how COVID-19 has revealed and exacerbated the inequities that public education educators have seen in classrooms since forever. The students who experience food insecurity and rely on school meals to stave off hunger. The students who don't even have a home. The nation has seen all of it and has also seen the faces of Black and Brown and Indigenous students and those living in marginalized communities, for whom those inequities are all too frequent realities. All that means one thing to those of us who are public school advocates. We must work harder than ever. We must demand every one of our students, everyone, has what they need when they need it, so they can live into their brilliance. We cannot be silent as long as inequities exist in our schools and in our society. Now, I know everyone here is doing the immediate work this pandemic demands, but we can and we must do more. In this moment of converging crises, we must educate the American public and push for solutions. No one wants to be in person with our students more than educators, but our students are depending on us to ensure schools are safe. That means we must demand Congress provide the funding that is needed to repair the many schools that didn't meet CDC standards before COVID-19 hit. And of course, we need you to press for universal mask usage and physical distancing and testing and tracing and all of the other CDC guidelines for operating safe schools. You can also help us draw more people into the profession, especially those from Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And you can also make clear that an expansion of recruitment campaigns, increased educator pay, and the respect for professional expertise and authority can help to attract more students into the profession. After carrying the trauma of the pandemic on their young shoulders for nearly a year, our students will need school nurses and counselors and other mental health professionals more than ever. They will need their educators to have ongoing professional development to equip them to handle students' expanding needs. Please raise your voice and demand that your communities make the investment that can provide the services our students so desperately need. Together, we must demand more from our elected leaders. There is nothing more important than funding our future. There is no more urgent need, no higher calling, no greater purpose than investing in our babies and their future. Together, every one of us must demonstrate that we are worthy of our students. Thank you.
Many thanks to Becky for not just summing up what's wonderful about our public schools, but for giving us, as she always does, a call to action. And that will be one of the closing notes of our conversation today. On behalf of certainly my own organization, AFT, and our president, Randy Weingarten, but more importantly, on behalf of all the members of the Learning First Alliance that you've heard from here today, I want to thank those who joined us. I want to deeply thank every one of our panelists for their wisdom and expertise and fantastic ideas. And of course, thank you to the LFA staff, Rich Long and Joetta Sackman, who helped make this happen. I'm inspired. I hope you're inspired. And we all know that the challenge of providing every child with the quality education, with the opportunity that they so richly deserve is an incredible challenge and one we must meet in this country. And with more of the wonderful people like I've had the privilege of sharing this conversation with on this Zoom meeting, I know that can happen. Really appreciate you and want to send you off to the rest of Public Schools Week with something fun. And that is the virtual chorus from Public School 22, who's going to do some singing for us. Now, PS 22 is in Staten Island, New York, and I will assure you that this is purely happenstance. It happens to be my kindergarten alma mater, and they have an amazing chorus. Thank you all for everything you do from the inside and the outside to support public schools every day in every way, and not just this week. And let's hear from the students. Thank you.
Come up to meet you, tell you I'm sorry. You don't know how lovely you are. I had to find you and tell you I need you.
Right when remote education started, I asked the kids, what song did we start do you most wish that we could have finished? And their answer was The Scientist by Coldplay. And I said, well, let's make that your graduation song then. I think people connect to the PS22 chorus performances because they put something into it that you just don't expect from a 5th grade child. I think it's just so beautiful to see these kids just taking a risk and putting their souls into these performances. We're not a magnet school, we're an ordinary elementary school, you know, with neighborhood children. They don't come to audition, you know, to our school for chorus. You know, they're zoned for the school, and if they're, you know, and if they get in chorus, they get in chorus. We did our best to try to make something beautiful come out of a really, really ugly situation.
Running in circles, chasing our tails, coming back as we are.